Welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Rain Race Podcast. Today we have a special IndyCar preview for you guys. We have Adam Stern out of Sports Business Journal joining us. He seems to know everything when it comes to IndyCar news at the moment, and we actually went over some discussion points that I think a lot of people wouldn't have thought about, so it's very interesting. If you're new to the podcast, you can check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, CastBox, and YouTube. All the links will be in the description on the YouTube video and on our Twitter at Rain Race Podcast. You can subscribe to us on any of those platforms so you don't miss a future episode. We have some more fantastic episodes coming up in the future that you're not going to want to miss. But without any further ado, enjoy. Season 2, Episode 3 of the Rain Race Podcast. We have an IndyCar preview episode here today, and I'm already laughing because of our guest lineup here. We're missing Kyle Cuthbertson. Go figure, the one episode that he would probably contribute the most to. He's not available, missing in action, I guess you could say. But we do have Kevin Rollins.
Hi.
We have David Land, so I guess, we still got the IndyCar knowledge here.
Yeah, you called me 15 minutes early, and I'm not going to let you live that down either.
And we also have Adam Stern on the line. He is an editor for Sports Business Journal, pretty much the who knows what when it comes to future IndyCar news right now, so I figured he'd be quite a valuable resource for this episode.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
All right, so we got a couple things to hit on for this episode. First off, IndyCar 2019. Biggest change overall, I'd say, for the entire series as a whole is that NTT is the new presenting sponsor of the series. Also, David, I don't know if I can take this as a quick jab to you, but you said NTT Data IndyCar Series in your video yesterday.
I may have been the first, but I will not be the last.
Yeah.
I guarantee you Lee Diffie will do it at least once on Sunday.
So NTT taking over Verizon for that title sponsor position. I didn't actually catch word of how much that deal was worth. I don't know if either of you heard. Wasn't the Verizon deal something around $10 million per season?
Yeah. The deal came in around $10 million for Verizon, between $5 million on their spend for the rights to IndyCar, and then $5 million for the media buy. And according to what we're hearing, the NTT deal came in right around the same. So, whether it's a little bit more, a little bit less, I certainly haven't seen the contract or anything like that, but apparently the deal is right around $10 million once again.
Yeah, so that's obviously, I know also Verizon, they used to like plugging some of their exclusive things within the app, so I'd be curious to see how that plays out this year. So far, looks like everything in the app is going to be pretty much free to everybody, but I haven't really seen anything to say otherwise so far. So that's quite interesting. But I would be curious to see what it does with the media side. I know you mentioned Verizon. They like to handle a lot with the media. There's been quite a few changes in the off-season. We're going to hit on some of those a little bit more with new TV packages, especially some prominent ones in Europe. But like I said, we'll hit on those a little bit later on. But I also want to talk about some of the new tracks that we're getting on this year's schedule. We lost ISM Raceway, for better or for worse. Personally,
huge loss.
I think that the tracks we got in return make up for it, even if David would argue that Coda's probably not going to be that exciting. I don't think.
Well, I was gonna go more Gomer and say we lost an oval for a road course, but that one works too.
Well, we have Coda is joining the schedule. That's going to be the first race after St. Pete. It's the week after St. Pete, 2 weeks after St. Pete.
2 weeks.
2 weeks after St. Pete.
Because Sebring is in the middle.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It'd be interesting to see what they do there. I mean, IndyCar did have a test there a couple of weeks ago. They actually had two tests, one in late 2018. And people already seem to be comparing F1 lap times with IndyCar, but I'd be curious to see what the racing product comes out of it. I know that F1 has been kind of, it's a hit or miss when it comes to Coda. Generally, I don't think it puts on the greatest racing for Formula One, but we'll have to see what it can do with a completely different car with much less downforce. I think that it could be quite an interesting race.
Well, I mean, last year's F1 race was rather entertaining.
Well, I think one of the things that Coda has working in its advantage right now is that the surface is starting to get nice and worn out, so you're seeing a lot more exciting racing from the track. But I do have a question for Adam. And this regards the business side of things, because that seems to be Adam's wheelhouse, is that Circuit of the Americas gotten a little bit of political doo-doo recently. They lost $20 million of state funding for missing some paperwork regarding human trafficking. Now, Adam, what have you kind of heard in regards to Circuit of the Americas and their ability to be financially viable this season, and maybe some of their events? Would they suffer from losing that amount of state funding?
I've been trying to get with Bobby Epstein, the chairman of COTA, and I'm still trying to do so. So I'm trying to get from the horse's mouth, which I don't have yet. But, certainly, not only did it start off as a $20 million loss according to the initial reports, but then further reports that there's actually more like $25 million. That is an absolutely staggering sum of money to lose. That is not even remotely close to a small amount for them. Because every year, the F1 fee to pay that to host a race costs around $25 to $30 million. So, they pretty much lost an entire year's worth of subsidies for the F1 race. So I saw an article, although I didn't read it. I saw a headline that I think in maybe Auto Week that said the F1 race was certainly safe for this year. So, I don't know if that's a case of Liberty Media has said, hey, look, F1, has said to COTA, hey, look, we're going to work with you. We're going to figure this out. Or what, but there's absolutely no doubt that that track was already for sale in recent years. It hasn't all. Bobby Epstein does a good job there, but I think he's been looking to possibly bring in new partners or maybe even sell it in whole. So I can't imagine in a million years that they would lose $25 million and it'd be a small deal to them. So we'll see if they can figure that out with the state of Texas. It seems like a kind of bizarre technicality, and then you've got reports out there that it was actually F1 potentially that messed it up as opposed to COTA in terms of not filing it soon enough. So again, I haven't been able to get from the horse's mouth yet in terms of Bobby, how big of a blow this is if they can't recoup it. And furthermore, is he still working to try and figure this out? Because it seems like it's, a technicality that's not really productive unless Texas as a state just says we don't want to fund this anymore and we're going to use this as our excuse. So, we're still trying to figure that out, and hopefully we can follow up soon. But I certainly think that this is if they truly are going to lose $25 million that they expected to have, I have to think that's a devastating blow.
I'd be curious to see what that means for, the future of all events of that track. I know IndyCar at a lot of road courses like Mid-Ohio, they usually get massive crowds. But COTA, I know that they've hurt pretty much in attendance for every race they've done except for Formula One from what I've gathered. So I'd be kind of curious to see what sort of profit they can pull out of that race.
I've heard some initial attendance projections around 20K, but I'm not sure exactly what the hosting fee is and where they come out with that.
Well, we've seen events come and go. It's been a revolving door at Circuit of the Americas. At one point they had V8 supercars, ALMS, World Endurance Championship. I think MotoGP. I don't remember if they still have that event there or not. But
they
just
do.
so okay, so that's one of the ones that stayed around for a while. It's been such a revolving door. It almost seems like everything at that track, and it makes sense because it was built for it, is revolving around the Formula One race. It's almost like, I guess, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. If the Indy 500 suddenly lost $25 million, you would imagine that the events like the Brickyard 400 would probably be in trouble. So I don't know. It seems like something that I would worry about if I were IndyCar and maybe look for other options already, even though you just announced this event.
And we'll have to see how it goes. But I can say this, I had people at my office initially asking me like, hey, look, is this a big deal for them? And again, you just go back to that one key figure that it costs. And this is an absurd amount. This is why F1 is getting in trouble. It worked in the old Bernie days, but it's not really working these days. They were potentially going to give away a race to Miami for free because, the $30 million fee or $25 million fee, it works for certain countries where they want to use it as a marketing expenditure to get, tourists to come and whatnot. But that's kind of less and less a model that the countries are using. That's why Mexico is potentially going to drop theirs. The president of Mexico has now diverted their funds away. So the Mexican Grand Prix is in legit danger. So, you look at that sum and how that measures up, the amount they lost is pretty close to how much it costs to host a race for an entire year. Again, I have no idea yet if, this means they're going to seek new ownership or what's going to happen. But I can't imagine in a million years that this is a sum that they're just going to say, hey, look, we lost $25 million, no big deal. I don't know what the ramifications are yet, but they could be substantial. So again, it's a little bit speculation what that means, but this is no small sum for sure. it doesn't. It seems like a technicality that they could work out if they wanted to, right? I mean, it seems like if the state of Texas didn't want to lose this race and was really invested in this race, it seems like something that they could work out. I mean, I know that the spokesman for, I believe, Texas Governor Abbott came out and said that, by law they can't. This thing was missed, but COTA's claiming that they actually did have it on file from the MotoGP race, and that it actually should have been able to, essentially go over to the F1 race. So it just seems like an interesting situation, which smells a little fishy to me. I'm not saying by any stretch that I have any knowledge that, Texas does not invest in this race and they're using this as an excuse, but you can't rule it out because it's just such a weird situation. So I think it'll be interesting to see if maybe COTA can somehow figure something out and whether they can recoup some of this money. But yeah, like you guys have said, I echo your thoughts. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens if they can, because it's a huge amount of money.
If I'm not mistaken, Texas, the actual state, invested heavily in the construction of COTA. If that's true and they haven't really seen the return that they were expecting, maybe they would be a lot less willing to overlook stuff like that, considering, it could just be a giant money pit for them at this point.
Well, there's historical precedent for this sort of thing too. If you look back in history, big tracks are not too big to fail. I think COTA was constructed for somewhere around 125 million, something like that. It was a big number. It may have been way higher than that actually, but it was a huge number. But if you look back, you look at Ontario Motor Speedway, that was a clone of Indy that was built out in California. As soon as that stopped becoming profitable and the land became more valuable than the racetrack was, they tore that thing down. There's not a trace of it left.
It's all about money and at the end of it. And, when racing doesn't become profitable for a certain area, they do away with it. I
do want to move on here to to another race that's new on the calendar. We touched on this a little bit in the first season when it was first announced, but Laguna Seca will be replacing Sonoma as a season finale. This has been met with generally positive feedback. I know that a lot of people are happy to see it back. Last time they ran a race there was back in the Champ Car days, good 15 plus years ago, so it's going to be interesting to see them back. They already did a test at Laguna Seca as well. Not too much to hit on there because they're not really, at least as far as we know of, not in any major financial situation like Circuit of the Americas is. But just quick roundtable opinions on what you guys would expect out of Laguna Seca. Do you think it's going to put on a better race for a finale than Sonoma did?
Everybody hopes it does. But we can't really say right now how it's going to go. If I remember right, there was a really high hopes for Phoenix amongst the fan base, and look how that went.
Yeah.
But I honestly do have high hopes. I will be attending that race, which I can't wait for. But I'll give my opinions on it after I see the race.
I'll give you one clear distinction between Laguna Seca and Phoenix. They didn't tear Laguna Seca up and change the track fundamentally and ruin it. So, it's virtually the same track that they left in 2004. And in regards to the question, will it be better than Sonoma? I can think of at least one memorable race that happened at Laguna Seca, and I can't think of any that happened at Sonoma. So there's your answer.
I think David knows some great points. I think I would just listen to some of the people so far as trying to judge the on-track part. And it seems like most people are understandably saying that, it's going to run somewhat similar to Sonoma. Of course, they're both road courses. But, I think there's, from the on-track side, I'd be surprised if it's, an absolute barn burner, of course. It's road course races are not, exactly what we see as far as like a Fontana race a couple of years ago in the ovals. That most thrilling kind of IndyCar racing tends to happen, I think, on ovals. But I see no reason why it can't be a solid race, and hopefully there's some great moments. As far as off the track, it'll be interesting to see. I think you look at a team like Andretti. They have like their winery out in Sonoma. They really like being in Sonoma. It was really a perfect place to host, a lot of guests at the end of the year. I think a lot of teams felt that way, but the Monterey area is also beautiful as well. So I think off the track, hopefully most of the paddock will accept it and their partners, and we'll just have to see how the attendance goes. Obviously the attendance wasn't that great at Sonoma anyway. So as long as they bring out 10, 20,000, that's certainly what they were probably having at Sonoma. So hopefully if they can do any better than that, I think it'd be a wild success.
Adam, you made a great point, and that's something that not a lot of people understand about Sonoma. Everybody kind of said, "Oh, it's a boring race. Why is it the season finale?" But there are major business concerns in that California area, particularly in Sonoma, like you mentioned. Just describe real quick how important those kind of decisions are for IndyCar to make when they're producing a schedule. It's not just about what races will A, get the most attendance, and B, make the most exciting TV product. It's also about rubbing those sponsors' backs.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. And I think, behind the scenes, and some of this kind of crept out a little bit publicly. I mean, I reported on it to an extent, if memory serves. I'm trying to remember my own mind, but I'm pretty sure some of this we reported that, Andretti, they were the one team that was very heavy on staying in Sonoma. I mean, not to say that they're not going to embrace Laguna Seca, but they were definitely okay staying in Sonoma because I'm pretty sure they hosted like 500, 600, 700. I mean, they had a huge amount. It was well into the hundreds, potentially as much as 500, 600, 700 that they would host every, IndyCar season finale out there. Again, I think Mario Andretti might have some sort of stake or his own winery out there. So there was definitely some, and, I think Team Penske as well. They had, a lot of great stuff going on there. Obviously, I think Sonoma might be a little bit closer to San Francisco. I could be wrong about that. Obviously, they're both kind of in that area. So I think that's the reason why IndyCar was ultimately able to convince them is, it's still a race in California where you should be able, near the tech hubs where you should be able to get a lot of people to hopefully come out, not kind of really in the middle of nowhere. So those things definitely play into it. But in this case, I think, IndyCar was able to convince the paddock that really, wasn't working that well at Sonoma. So why not just take a chance on going back to this classic IndyCar track that, has produced some great memories over the years.
I know that Sonoma is closer to San Francisco. It's just right across pretty much the bay. But I'd say that in terms of like Silicon Valley as a whole, you look at like the Cupertino area. I think that Laguna Seca is pretty much right around their prime area, especially near Pebble Beach, all those famous landmarks. I'd be curious to see if in future seasons, if they'd be able to pull in some Silicon Valley tech corporate as a title sponsor for that race. You get some executive that shows up to the race, just doesn't know much about the series maybe, but likes the product he sees there, thinks it's going to be profitable. I'd be curious to see if we can get some tech giant to go in there as a sponsor in future seasons.
I think they added the title sponsor recently, didn't they? It was one of the IndyCar. Was it Firestone? I think they.
Yeah, I think it was.
Right. So I think they have those for right now. But look, there's going to be a lot of companies out there, and even if they, you talk about hosting some of the C-suite guys in some of these big tech companies, or even mid-sized tech companies, there's all sorts of, you don't even have to just land a major player, but just hosting those guys out there, they don't have to necessarily turn to the title sponsor for the race. I mean, they can turn to team sponsors, things like that. So that's why certainly IndyCar wants to continue to be in that area. It's obviously IndyCar is kind of a little bit more tech-centric of a series to an extent than maybe NASCAR, although obviously NASCAR goes to Sonoma as well and does a lot of stuff there, as well as LA. So I think it's good for IndyCar to still have a presence in that area, but it'll definitely be interesting to see what the reception is as far as whether the teams feel like they're still getting as good of a bang for their buck for their sponsors as they were in Sonoma. That's definitely something to keep an eye on, although obviously it's not for about 6 months, so we have a while till it happens.
Yeah, you brought a great point there. I didn't even think about the team perspective there and how they might gain from that if some company decides to sponsor them. Moving on, I want to talk about some of the new drivers. We have a lot of new drivers, especially for the opening race at St. Petersburg in a couple of days. Actually, when this is going up, it's probably tomorrow if you're listening to it right after it comes out. Some names have just completely flown under the radar. I mean, we have, obviously, I think the two biggest ones that people have been talking about are Felix Rosenqvist and Marcus Ericsson, obviously with Ericsson's Formula One experience with Sauber. But you have Ben Hanley going to St. Petersburg with Dragon Speed. I mean, that entry is pretty much completely flown under the radar for me entirely. I mean, I haven't really heard much of the Dragon Speed stable, but it does look like they're all gunning and ready for the St. Pete race. Santino Ferrucci for Dale Coyne will be there. Jack Harvey with Meyer Shank. I mean, you have a lot of these young guns who don't have a ton of IndyCar experience going to St. Pete. I'd be curious to see what they can do because I know last year, I think it was the first practice session when you had, who was it that just got
laced?
Yeah, Matthias Laced got first place, and then Jordan King was also up there last year all weekend. I mean,
and Wickens qualified on the pole.
yeah, all these drivers
and dominated the race.
had no experience. It was really surprising to see what they could do. So I'd be curious to see what some of these young guns can do at the St. Petersburg race this weekend.
The Swedish invasion. You definitely have the. It's kind of funny because we haven't had a Swede in IndyCar since Kenny Breck, and Breck turned out pretty good. So I don't know. Between the two of them, I think Rosenquist right now is kind of the guy that not as many people are looking at, obviously because of the F1 thing with Ericsson. But it's hard for me to think about. I think Rosenquist will do better on the season. But I have a hard time thinking that he's going to, and I'm fully expecting to get totally wrong on this. I don't think he's going to do much better than Ed Jones or Tony Kanaan did in that car. It just seems like the second Ganassi car almost always gets kind of shuffled to the back because they kind of throw their priority behind Scott Dixon. Ben Hanley's going to be interesting to see. I think he's a driver kind of in the same vein as Marcus Ericsson that's getting an opportunity and really wants to show, hey, I'm made of the same stuff that everybody else here is made of. And obviously we know Santino Ferrucci, as Paul Tracy once called him, Santucci. He had a lot of negative energy around him last year, let's say. He's going to be a guy that's going to be if I'm him, I don't know, I don't want to speak for him. I think he's going to be looking to prove that he can keep his nose clean and not cause controversy. We'll see, though. He may cause a 10-car pileup in turn one.
The thing about Santucci is that, I mean, he was basically unknown. He flew really under the radar at Sonoma last year. And, I mean, based off of the things I've heard, that he's really gained his confidence back in himself during the testing sessions over the wintertime. So I'm not expecting great things out of him, but I'm expecting him to perform at a relatively respectable level. I mean, the 19 car hasn't always been the best car, but when you get a good driver in there, we've seen what they can do.
Yeah, I think certainly, as David said, the Swedish invasion is a big one. I mean, not only on the track, but off the track, certainly that kind of furthers just another region to get kind of reinvigorated with IndyCar. The international growth of this series seems legitimate. Now, we'll have to see if any of these TV deals that we've seen some backlash to today has any impact on that. But certainly the one in Scandinavia seemed to be pretty well received at the time that they signed that a couple of weeks ago and it got announced. So, I think off the track, that's great for IndyCar that you have two Swedish drivers now, obviously one from Formula One, one from Formula E, now in the series. Obviously, Colton Herta, what can he do? At the same time, obviously, everyone's going to kind of have in the back of their mind the fact that Patricio O'Ward right now is not out there. So, Harding Steinbrenner and what that kind of looks like, how can they perform? Are they going to be kind of, obviously O'Ward did great at Sonoma last year, so can they kind of match that? Or are they going to be kind of more in the back of the pack? I think that'll be interesting to see as far as some of the rookies as well. So it seems like they got a pretty decent rookie class this year. To your point, Santino Ferrucci, obviously, I think negative energy was a good way to put it. Certainly last year was controversial for him for sure after that whole, intentional crash deal in F2, I think it was. So certainly, he's someone who it seems like every time you mention him on social media, you get some people who are replying that they don't like him and things like that. So I think
and worse.
David brings up a good point. Exactly.
And
so
worse.
I think you're right. So he's probably going to, like you said, have to keep his nose clean this year. It's going to be a big year for him to show that he can be a professional, I think, quite frankly, which, you would hope in the perfect world he'd just be having to prove his kind of, driving ability, but now it's more about his temper and temperament as well. So a big year for him, but it seems like IndyCar has an overall solid, pretty solid rookie class. Obviously, again, if O'Ward was in there, I think that'd be a lot better for the series for several reasons, both, his driving skills and his potential fan base. But hopefully he can dig up a couple races and obviously at least be at Indy and maybe a couple others. So we'll see what happens with that story.
That was a great point, and I feel terrible that I forgot to bring up Herta because he was lightning quick in testing. I mean, he was 1.5 seconds up on the field at one point in one of the sessions in testing, and considering how tight the field is these days, 1.5 seconds is a massive performance gap. It'll be interesting to see if that translates from testing to the races. And I completely agree about Pato. Hashtag justice for Pato. That's one of the biggest shames in a while, because, as you said, and as my observations kind of are, I think O'Ward is a potential generational talent kind of guy. I think he's kind of in the same vein as a Zanardi, or even more recently a Rossi kind of driver who really, really looks good and may, in a couple of years after some experience, be really, really good. So I don't know. It's really a shame that it went down the way it did with Harding Racing, because that would have been a super team with those two young guns.
The whole Harding Racing situation was a nightmare for them, because I'm not going to say too much, but they have had a lot of struggles, and some of that came to light. And not just on the racing end of things, on their other end, which they're a big asphalt paving contractor. They've had a lot of issues, let's say, and some of that came to light over the Pato O'Ward issue. And I mean, it was kind of made even worse by I forgot who it was on Twitter. It was Santia Rudia, and his revelation. So Harding Racing really needs Harding Steinbrenner Racing needs a really good showing to kind of put some of this behind them, and also Colton Herta needs a good showing, because a lot of a fair chunk of the negativity over the Pato O'Ward situation has been blown in his way as well. With a lot of people saying he shouldn't be there, it should be Pato instead of him.
I don't know how I forgot Herta, because like you said, David, when you looked at his performance at COTA, it was really eye-opening. No one was really expecting that much of a pace deficit between him and, some of these really talented guys like Scott Dixon. And
but it's only testing.
Yeah, it is only testing. That's the thing. I'd be curious to see where he ranks himself at St. Pete, and furthermore at these other tracks, like Circuit of the Americas, when they actually race there, Barber. But yeah, he does have a lot to prove, like you said, Kevin, as well, because a lot of these people said, I saw people on Twitter, too, straight up told him, Pato O'Ward deserved this seat over you, this and that,
The whole reason that Colton's even in that seat is because the Steinbrenners bought into the team, and, Steinbrenner has been a huge backer for his career.
Here's my assessment of the situation, especially because I think it came out in a Robin Miller article that the two team owners, being George Steinbrenner and Mike Harding, split the responsibilities to find funding for their drivers. One of the owners did that, and one of the owners didn't do that. So,
one of the owners did it through selling popcorn and stuff at a baseball game. The other one, not as much.
There's always that one part of every episode. Every one episode.
No, but I think to Kevin's point, though, there's a lot of talk about how Steinbrenner was able to get their funding together and Harding wasn't, but there's been no sponsorship unveiled for the entire team. So you got to think that really this is just coming out of George Steinbrenner's pocketbook, or excuse me, it's Hank Steinbrenner, right? Or is it Hal? It's Hank,
one of them,
right? So, yeah, it's Hank. It's Hank. Excuse me. So, I think it's coming out of Hank Steinbrenner's pocketbook really right now. From that perspective, you can't really. It's certainly unfortunate to see that it's happened, but neither side has landed sponsorship to this point. The opener is this weekend and nothing's been unveiled. So unless they're unveiling something over the next couple of days, it seems like obviously this is just coming out of Hank Steinbrenner's pocketbook to fund Herta for the season right now. Now, obviously, you can land sponsorship throughout the season, so we'll see what happens. But as of right now, it doesn't seem like they've landed anything, unfortunately.
And keep in mind, the whole pace from Harding Steinbrenner Racing at COTA, yes, there was only testing, but keep in mind their new alliances. They're at Honda now, which means that they can get closer to effectively their parent team at Andretti. They got full-on support on the dampers and stuff like that from Andretti. So basically, it's not one of those things where they have to be secretive about their partnership. And Andretti is only about 10 miles away. They're based about 10 miles away from Harding Steinbrenner Racing's base in Indianapolis. So there's a really close connection in the team. Plus, keep in mind, Brian Herta really closely associated with Andretti Autosport too. So,
Kevin, let's just say what it is. It's a fifth Andretti car.
Yeah, I was
That's what
trying
it
to
is.
avoid saying that, but I was trying to
I'm
say
more
that.
than willing to say that because that's what it is. And that's why you're going to see the pace increase. I mean, the dampers that they were using last year were from KV Racing, and they were built in 2012. So they were well out to lunch with their equipment last year. And as soon as they got the Andretti parts in Sonoma, suddenly you saw a massive performance leap.
I want to talk about some TV deals too. I hinted about this earlier. There's two notable ones that I want to talk about. First one is their TV deal in Canada, which was just announced today. By the way, there's an article on IndyCar.com for pretty much all the international broadcasters if you want to check that out, because we're not going to cover all of them. Because I think there's something like they're reaching 70 approximately 100 nations. So, I mean, that would take probably about 2 hours, and I'm not going to do that. But I want to touch on Canada and the United Kingdom, because those seem to be the two big ones. Canada, obviously, because first of all, they have an IndyCar race, and second off, they're probably the second biggest presence for IndyCar racing because they're in North America. So Canada, the races will be continuing on Sportsnet. So I guess it's going on between three channels. I'm just trying to figure this out on the spot here. Sorry, but Sportsnet World, Sportsnet 360, and Sportsnet 1. Adam, I don't know if you'd be able to touch on that a little bit more. I know you seem to have sort of an insider knowledge on these TV packages. I know this one was just announced today, but if you have anything specifically that you'd like to add on that, feel free.
Yeah, I think it seems like, unfortunately for IndyCar, they might have just lost a little bit of leverage with Sportsnet. I mean, obviously, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have the races only on an OTT network or on a linear package, but it's an extra linear package. So basically, it's kind of like, an extra cable channel that you have to buy additionally on top of your usual cable. So it seems like, from what I can understand, that those are the two places it's appearing for fans in Canada. It's either you got to buy the streaming package from Sportsnet, or you have to have sort of cable, but now you're going to have to buy an additional channel. So, I mean, look, obviously that's not ideal if you're a fan. I think, we know how fans are, and we're all fans in certain regards of something, right? So everyone obviously would rather have something for free than pay for it. I mean, that's just, if I offered you a free dinner or a dinner you got to pay for, and they were the same thing, you'd take the free one. So obviously we've seen this with Supercross. I think Monster Energy Supercross fans were very, they put a pretty big response up when they realized that they were going behind the paywall with NBC Sports Gold. We didn't see quite as bad of a response, I think, or as negative a response from IndyCar fans, in part possibly because the package for IndyCar was cheaper. The package for IndyCar with NBC was $50, and for Supercross it was $75. And they also have some slightly different kind of features of them. But, so I think for Canadian fans, I mean, we've seen the response today. Obviously social media can be a little bit of an echo chamber. So, you can't just take what you're seeing on social media and say that's absolutely 100% of the population's response. But clearly it's a place where it's really worth taking the temperature. And you saw the responses today were, unfortunately for IndyCar, not that positive. So, certainly concerning. I mean, it's a major place as far as fan base for IndyCar. Outside of the U.S., I would have to think that Canada's in the top 5, maybe top 3. So maybe, right after the U.S. with the biggest fan base potentially. So I think it's something that they're definitely going to be keeping an eye on. Is there any way to rectify it? I'm not sure. We'll just have to see what happens. But it looks like for one reason or the other, they just didn't have the leverage to get this on to some better TV channels. And, is it going to do damage? I mean, we'll have to see as far as the fan base. But I think if you're IndyCar and you're seeing the percentage of negative to neutral comments with almost no positive comments today, I'd be surprised if any of them would, could honestly tell you they're not concerned.
Adam, there's an important business point in the TV deals that are being negotiated this year versus negotiated last year. Last year and all years previous, to my knowledge, IndyCar went to a third party to negotiate their deals. Now IndyCar is directly negotiating their own TV contracts. Obviously, we've seen their effectiveness negotiating those contracts, but what kind of an impact does this have on IndyCar and its bottom line to have that cash flow coming directly to them rather than kind of through a middleman?
Well, I think talking to Mark Miles and then also talking to Steven Starks, who kind of runs up the promoter relations and also now media for IndyCar, it almost seemed like they were doing this. I think in the long run, they think this can make them more money, but it seemed like really they were doing it because they felt that, that third party was ESPN International. That's who they previously licensed the rights to. So obviously they licensed the rights to ESPN International and got a certain amount in return. And you would think that they got a certain amount in return that was, what they figured was a fair price. So theoretically, they may not necessarily be getting a ton more money right off the break. I think what they thought was, nobody knows our product better than us. So why are we going to have someone out there selling it for us? Particularly if they felt like ESPN International was not all in and ESPN was not all in. And obviously ABC and ESPN lost IndyCar rights. So, I don't know their exact thinking on that, but I obviously with ABC and ESPN kind of having to check out of IndyCar because they lost the rights to NBC, theoretically they're not going to be more all in on the sport. So I think IndyCar just felt like nobody knows our sport better than us. We can sell these rights directly. And in the long run, by deepening engagement with these broadcasters around the world, as they add programming about IndyCar and they get to know us better. So they do more coverage because we're kind of showing them the sport more, et cetera. That can lead to more long-term revenue because you're going to grow more fans. So I think that's why they did it. But look, again, you look at the Canada result and, so far it's not so good, I don't think. So we'll just have to see, again, was social media just a little bit of an echo chamber today? And, a lot of fans end up being okay with this, or was this real? Was the temperature we saw on social media, what's going to play out across the board, and it's going to turn into a very perilous situation for IndyCar as far as a major part of their fan base outside of the U.S. So the proof will be in the pudding. We'll just have to see. But again, I think any IndyCar executive would tell you they'd probably be concerned, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a mistake for them to take the deal in house. I don't know the exact details of the negotiations with Sportsnet. It might have just been that, there's a new executive at Sportsnet who wasn't feeling IndyCar and felt like it wasn't worthy of some of their better programming. Maybe, there was just too much programming that was already tied up to other properties. So I don't know the 100% story there, but, I think in the long run, they hope it'll make them more money to have the rights in-house, but it'll be interesting to see kind of if they run into more situations like this. One last thing I'll say is they hired the executive from ESPN, and they hired an executive from ESPN International who was helping oversee this previously. So theoretically, they didn't lose any human capital, knowing these deals and knowing these broadcasters. So, it's interesting to see that, that this is the deal they were able to come up with. But, without knowing further details of exactly why they weren't able to get perhaps a slightly better deal from the fans' perspective, I'll have to hold off until I can get more details there.
I do want to quickly throw in here, and I want to correct myself. Earlier I did say that they'd be broadcasting across 3 channels in Canada. That is correct, but they're also primarily, it seems like, Adam, you hinted on this, it seems like primarily they want to switch towards a streaming prominent platform through Sportsnet Now Plus. Similar, it seems, to what NBC Sports Gold is here in the United States. And like you said, both don't really seem to be met with that positive feedback. I know that a lot of consumers say, all right, well, I'm already paying for cable. All the races are going to be on cable, so why should I have to pay an extra $50 a year here in the U.S. to watch practice and qualifying? We're getting a better product when we watch these practice streams because last year was IMS commentary on top of some YouTube camera angles that were cycling. This year is going to be a proper NBC-produced feed with commentators like Lee Diffie, Paul Tracy, Townsend Bell. But a lot of these people don't really care about that. They care about saving money. And at the end of the day, it seems like IndyCar, they're doing something that's really experimental. I don't think I've seen that many series apart from F1. They seem to be getting into the streaming market heavily with Liberty. But I haven't really seen any other series try to jump into this streaming prominent market as quick as IndyCar has.
Well, in the U.S., obviously they've still got the linear relationship with NBC Sports. That they're going to have all the races that are going to be, kind of the gold packages really seems like for qualifying and practice, and so, obviously Supercross has their package as well. They have some races that are going to be all their races are live on the gold package, but some of them on TV are delayed. So, Supercross is certainly kind of taking that dive as well and also seeing a little bit of a backlash from it. It's interesting, from a broad perspective, like here at Sports Business Journal, we're covering OTT in a big way. And it's not just motorsports. Let me say, DC United and MLS, they went behind an OTT paywall this past offseason, and they saw a huge backlash, so that's soccer fans. So I think it's a very fascinating time because we're kind of seeing these media landscapes and platforms kind of really start to shift before our eyes. And there's been a lot of talk about OTTs the future, and that talk went on in 2016 and 2017, 2018. Here we are in 2019, and some of the properties are starting to actually take that dive in. So definitely something to keep an eye on. IndyCar also formed this relationship with DAZN, which is a really kind of big, growing global platform that's now headed up by the former president of ESPN, John Skipper. So that's going to be for, I think, like Italy, Brazil, Switzerland, and Germany are going to be the areas that get that. They also have a relationship with MotoGP. So, yeah, it's definitely some interesting deals. And look, again, we'll just have to see. Maybe this will work out in the end in Canada one way or the other. But, I mean, obviously, you could just read the social media responses today and tell it was a little bit of a tough response for sure.
On a slightly more positive note, though, I want to talk about the United Kingdom because they're actually switching their rights over from BT Sport to Sky Sports F1. I think from a series perspective and trying to gather more fans, especially in a season where they have Fernando Alonso, an extremely prominent former Formula One driver racing the Indy 500 again, for them to have all of the races on a channel that most Formula One fans would already have to watch those races, I think that if you're trying to expand the series to these fans, that's just probably, and David, you made a whole video about this as well, that's probably the best move they could have made because all these fans who are already paying for Sky Sports F1, they're already going to have access to these IndyCar races.
I said it's as big as kart on Eurosport back in the 90s. I mean, it's big. And I know some people in the United Kingdom, I saw them in my comments, were upset that Formula One itself is going behind a paywall, so to speak, going onto a paid channel rather than having having it being available on a free channel. But to be honest with you, again, Sky Sports F1 being the place you can go and get Formula One racing, and now also the place you can go and get IndyCar racing, not only does it add value to that channel for people who may have been on the fence whether or not to buy it just for F1, but the people who already bought it for F1 now are going to get more value out of that, and probably, I would guess, they'll watch the F1 race, I guess, in the afternoon for them, and then in the evening, watch the IndyCar race.
Yeah, I think it's major news for opening doors to a lot of new fans. I already said that. I think that in terms of a series perspective from IndyCar, I think that they couldn't have really gone better with that.
Yeah, I don't have any financial figures as far as what they're getting for these deals right now. We can try and dive into that and see what we can dig up. But as David was saying, I think it's definitely a good move. I mean, my understanding from checking out some bloggers who cover F1 media, things like that, was that BT Sport was not doing the best job of promoting IndyCar. So obviously it was already on TV in England, but apparently there was suffering from a serious lack of promotion. I think it's a blog called, I think, F1 Broadcasting, and I think they had the stat that IndyCar races were averaging around 20,000 viewers per race, which obviously, it's in Britain, so it's not like that's the U.S., but that's still not a huge amount of people. So, I think definitely moving to, in a perfect world, I guess it would probably move to the major Sky Sports channel that is on still free-to-air TV. But obviously this F1 channel they have seems to be getting pretty well established. It seems like a channel that a lot of people have. And I think, look, similar to how you read the tea leaves and you read the comments from the Canada deal, and unfortunately for IndyCar, those were going in the bad direction. I mean, I think clearly the response you saw on social media for England and Sky Sports F1 indicated the opposite. I mean, it seemed like most people were happy with this. There were some people in the comments who were saying, oh, it's not free to air, so it's this extra cable channel. But it seemed like it was a really good response. So, again, I think obviously you have to be careful about saying, okay, I saw this on social media, and that means it's definitely the case of around 100% of people. But definitely it seemed like there was a good response there, and I think that indicates that a lot of people have this channel. Obviously, we're not located in England, so we don't know the percentage of things like that, but it seems like a good amount of motorsports fans in England have this channel. So, I know obviously F1 races there get, I think, certainly well into the six figures, if not the seven figures per race in Britain in terms of amount of viewers. So certainly, 20,000, if IndyCar can grow that by 2, 3, 4, 5 times that under Sky Sports F1 this year. That'd be a big win. And again, it just keeps showing that, it started with Fernando Alonso in the Indy 500 in 2017. The series is doing well in the U.S., but it is really taking off internationally.
I was gonna say the real thing for Sky Sports is for the British fans. They're going to be the one-stop shop for really the Super Sunday, I guess you could call it, with the Monaco Grand Prix and the Indy 500 both being on the same channel on the same day, pretty much back to back. That's going to be fantastic for them. And I mean, it's great to have both two of the biggest races in the world on the same channel on the same day.
And consider that in UK time, the Indy 500 is going to be taking place in prime time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that you got to think that the ratings are going to be massive for that race.
Yeah, and the coverage is going to start right after Monaco post race is over, so you're just going to have probably an insane amount of carryover people.
Yeah, everybody who fell asleep during Monaco will just sleep right through the Indy 500.
I mean, there's a lot of people that love Fernando. There's a lot of people that don't necessarily like him. But you can actually give him a lot of credit for this blossoming period that IndyCar has had. It got the eyes on it, and IndyCar has taken and knocked it out of the park in especially last season with their product. I mean, they've improved it. They've gotten cars that are significantly better aesthetically and performance-wise. And, last year was very critical for IndyCar, and this year maybe even more so.
I'm not sure if it's always been this way, but it seems like there's a lot of F1 fans right now who are kind of trying to turn to an alternative product. And obviously F1, similar to NASCAR in many ways, I mean, it's amazing how many different parallels there are between the way Formula One and NASCAR are both trying to remake themselves heading into 2021. But, it seems like Formula One and how they're racing right now, of course, there's just not a ton of overtaking. You have these same, pretty much 3 dominant teams, really 2, that are always winning the races. So it seems like there's more kind of F1 fans than ever. I'd be interested to hear some of your guys' perspective potentially on this, but it seems like from my perspective, there's more F1 fans than ever that are looking at Indy cars like, okay, they actually have competition there. Obviously, Fernando Alonso kind of starting to say that in the F1 press, and that getting out there maybe furthered that. So it's really a great time for IndyCar to try and seize on some of that and maybe take some of that global market share of open wheel fans.
Well, I have 2 observations about that. From what I've seen on social media, and again, like you said, you can't totally gauge every reaction as truth, but I see a lot of Formula One fans who will come into comment sections about IndyCar racing and will say how much better the racing is than X Grand Prix, whichever one happened more recently. And I will also say, to your point about NASCAR and F1 trying to reboot themselves, well, IndyCar is kind of ahead of the curve on that one because in a lot of ways the Universal Aero Kit was a Back to the Future kind of a thing. Was it the most forward-thinking move they could have possibly made? No, but it was a crowd-pleasing one. And I think in this era of motorsports where not only are new fans at such a premium, you almost have to cater to the old fans just to keep them around. So I think, to your point, I think we're going to see F1 and NASCAR kind of start to go further backwards and kind of take some of the elements that people miss and liked quite a bit of the past and bring them forward, kind of like IndyCar has done with their current product. And we're seeing that the fans have reacted more positively, and some of the new fans kind of coming in will say, this is missing from NASCAR, or that's missing from F1. I'm glad IndyCar is doing that. So I think that's what we're going to see.
I have a couple points as well. I mean, if you look at and there's 3 series that have really common denominators, and they are both have been on the decline. And those 3 series are F1, NASCAR, and WEC. And the common denominator is they have a problem. And when they have a problem, they always have a knee-jerk reaction. They don't always see things through necessarily. Well, they don't have the best solution. Well, IndyCar, they saw that they had a cost issue. They made a very deliberate move. They kept the AeroKit era going through its anticipated original run. They halted development on it. And it's like, okay, we're going to have a new car. It's going to, be easier on the pocketbook, and it's going to be more enticing to small teams. And when they unveiled it, it actually, they actually gave it time. They gave it proper testing. They, they did everything they needed to show that, yes, this car works. It's completely different design, but it's the same chassis that we had. You just got to alter it a little bit. It's not these crazy knee-jerk reactions that we've seen from NASCAR, WEC, and F1. And my other point is that F1 to the hardcore fan will always be number one. I mean, to the people that get really deep into the tech stuff, that notice every little minuscule change of the car every single race, it's going to be hard to win them over. But for the casual fan, IndyCar is easier to understand because, we're not talking about these super mega hybrid systems. We're not talking about all these little winglets and S-ducts and stuff like that. It's just a basic product compared to F1. And simplicity is a great thing.
I think more to your point, David, is that F1 fans, there's two sides of them. There's really some that are just like, no, I'm just going to watch F1. Kevin, you said this too. I'm just going to watch F1. But I've also seen a ton of people who have sort of just crossed the pond. They say, you know what? I never thought I'd be an IndyCar fan watching these guys do laps around Iowa. But they actually turn out to enjoy that now.
That's one thing that's been lost real quick. That's one thing that's been lost in the TV deals and the NBC Gold thing. The free streaming on YouTube is a bigger loss than I think IndyCar is willing to admit. And maybe they realized they were going to lose that by taking the money. But the fact that their product is no longer free to the majority of the world is definitely going to hurt them down the line. But go on.
Yeah, you're correct on that. But I also wanted to add in that I think that the Indy 500 this year is probably going to be, in terms of international presence, the most important Indy 500 that's probably ever existed. We already talked about that Monaco lead-in and the fact that it's on the same channel. I think that the Indy 500 is going to be really important. If they can get a really solid performance out of that race, gather some eyes. Also, you have to drag those same people over and have a good race for the doubleheader at Detroit. I know you'd kind of like maybe be skeptical about that, David, given
I'm groaning
years,
already.
But
it'd be a much better race if it was at Milwaukee or
well,
Michigan.
See, here's the thing: is
something.
you can gather the eyes of these European fans and know that a lot of them just hate watching oval racing, and that's fine. But when they go to that road course the week after, it has to put on a good performance, I'd say, if you want to try to keep as many fans as possible, because that's the one race they're going to be looking at after Indianapolis. And if it doesn't really put on a great show, I'd expect that that's where they're going to lose quite a few of those fans. All right.
I do think you should watch out for the potential of McLaren coming to IndyCar next year full time. That's got some very, very legitimate buzz and legs. I think we kind of had that thought last year that we knew they were looking at for 2019. We were able to first kind of get that out there last year in part because McLaren had people on the ground trying to find sponsorship, and we kind of heard about that, and so that's how that all kind of got out there. And this year obviously they've now hired a team president. They've already announced a little bit more of sponsorship. They've got more rolling out over the next. I know they've got another deal coming out tomorrow, Thursday. So, I think watching out for the potential of them joining in 2020 full time is definitely something you should keep an eye on this season.
So, since McLaren's having a sponsor announcement, I guess tomorrow, what time can we expect your video?
Depends if it's Coca-Cola or not. If it's Coke, I'm absolutely making a video. If it's actually, you know what the better one would be? The freaking cigarette company.
Better tomorrow.
If it's a better tomorrow, I'm absolutely making a video.
Oh,
it'll be a lot of fun. But so if it's sugar or if it's smokes, yes. If it's a website with 200 Twitter followers, probably not.
You mean like Group 1001 and their whole 7 Instagram followers?
Well, I was talking about, what was that one, Squarespace? I'm trying to look at that United Autosports model that has
ScanSource.
ScanSource, yeah, which has 200 Twitter followers.
I have no idea how Group 1001 has this money. I've told Kyle this before, but they're now Gainbridge is the presenting sponsor for the Indy 500. Where do they pull this money?
They have 54 followers on Instagram, and they're
Adam,
sponsoring the flipping.
You want to take this one or plead the fifth?
Yeah, no, I mean they're an insurance firm, so these are the sort of companies that they're B2B companies largely. Obviously this Gainbridge a brand is somewhat consumer facing, technically speaking, but it's obviously kind of targeted towards, people who are probably looking for financial services. It's not like McDonald's, it's not a consumer packaged good or something like that. But, insurance firms that we've never heard of can have billions of dollars in assets. So, I think the B2B side of motorsports, and this is partially on people like me to do a better job, but it gets undertold at times. Certainly everyone understands it, but it's such a big part. And, I think that's why Group 1001 originally came in to look to sign, some B2B deals with, whether it's fellow sponsors or, stakeholders in the sport, like teams and leagues, et cetera. And so, they had this new brand launching, and I guess, IndyCar, having already known them through, Group 1001 is a sponsor for the LPGA event at the IMS golf course. And also obviously they're with Zach Beach and Andretti. So, they brought them the opportunity, and I guess they had the money. So, obviously I think in a perfect world, IMS would have ended up with a more well-known brand. I think that I'm comfortable saying that, but at the same time, it sounds like, from what I understand, they're paying more money than what Pengrade was, which I think was around like 1.2 million annually for this. So it's a significant amount of money, and at the end of the day, that's big. So I think obviously to your guys' point, it's possible that Gamebridge will get more out of this than IMS will potentially, because IMS and Indy 500 is already a well-known, worldwide brand, and Gamebridge is really just completely brand new. So, is it the strongest move for IndyCar from a promotional perspective and having another brand promote your brand? Probably not, but it sounds like they wrote a decent check. And again, I mean, it's an insurance firm, so these are the sort of companies that can do a lot of business behind the scenes, and then you and I will never know about it because it's not a company that really makes the news.
Well, that's to your point, something, and I don't have the business background, but at the same time, I've tried to explain it to people in the past. You mentioned business-to-business deals and just how important they are to modern racing business and how it's done. I mean, in a lot of ways, the sponsorships that you see on race cars are not based on selling to the folks in the audience or in the stands or on TV. The sponsors are there because they want to cater to some of their very high-ranking shareholders and customers who buy lots and lots of their products or invest lots and lots of money in their company to bring them into the suite, bring them into the garage, feed them caviar, and maybe watch 4 or 5 laps of the race and say, oh, we're on an IndyCar. How cool is this? Here's an Instagram photo. I mean, that's a little bit cynical, but in a lot of ways, that's a lot of what modern sponsorship is versus direct to consumer, kind of the 90s NASCAR thing of, McDonald's is here and Burger King is here and Amoco is here and all these companies that you recognize and can go shop at Walmart are in the series. It's much more, business oriented and more of just those businesses trying to get their investors and their higher dollar people more warm to their company, I suppose.
It's that, and it's also, it's certainly hospitality with current customers and prospective customers. It's also trying to find customers through the sport. So, one example is, unfortunately, I haven't been able to get this on the record to be able to identify the companies involved yet, but I can just speak loosely that a bank in motorsports was recently able to get a major media company to become one of its clients. So like the major media company is now banking through this bank, and they've struck the deal through motorsports. Basically what I mean is the executives who struck the deal like met at a race, and things kind of grew from there. So that's another big part of it. And I think in a perfect world, some of these, as long as they're a company that, does both. I mean, there's, like a bank, for example, does B2B work and B2C work. Some of them do have consumer relations. So in a perfect world, you get a company that does both, but you're right, David, there are times where they're just focused on the behind the scenes. And that's why some people were interested in NTT. I mean, they're a little bit more of a B2B company in many regards, but they do things that touch the consumers, and they do kind of work on technology that ultimately ends up impacting consumers. So that hopefully can still be a great deal for the sport. But no question, B2B is kind of the coin of the realm right now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up, is that IndyCar as a whole seems to be switching from this sort of B2C format where they'd have Verizon, which, they did some business to business through their enterprise work, but, that's largely a business to consumer company. And NTT is something that a lot of people wouldn't know the name from because it's mainly a business to business company. And you look at Gamebridge, like you said, for the Indy 500, replacing Pengrade, it seems to be the direction that IndyCar, I'm not sure if they want to head this way, if this is all intentional, if this is just where the money is, but it seems to be the direction that they're heading.
I remember Mark Miles said when he was kind of hinting at who the title sponsor was going to be, which obviously eventually was revealed as NTT, that right now IndyCar is stronger in the B2B realm, but they're hoping to grow and become stronger in the B2C realm. I know that there was kind of some behind the scenes from people in the industry I spoke to. There's kind of a little bit of pushback about that notion. I mean, there's some people who strongly believe that the sport can be and also needs to be a place for consumer brands, because you need those companies to, not just excite fans, but also help market your sport. People talk about in the heydays of NASCAR, you couldn't go into a town where NASCAR was and not immediately see tons of brands activating, not just at the racetrack, but literally all throughout the city. And there's still a lot of people in NASCAR who talk about this is the reason why we're not as big anymore. We lost part of this. So, I know that people in IndyCar feel strongly that it needs to continue to be a platform that is not just only for B2B companies. So it's definitely part of motorsports right now. It's a big part of sponsorship, and it's a good thing. It's not necessarily something where it should be a dirty, thing here. Like B2B is not a bad thing at all. Other sports are trying to catch up to motorsports in certain regards in terms of how good, motorsports entities have become at helping, a company, whether it's with hospitality, like David said, of current customers and trying to grow that business, or introducing companies to do business together, which is, really valuable when that happens. So it's definitely not a bad thing at all that there's a lot of B2B going on. It's a strong thing, but at the same time, you can't only rely on that because you need consumer brands, not just to market your sport, but also I think fans enjoy seeing, cool brands that they know in the sport. And I can tell you, I've also spoken to someone from one of the more recognizable sponsors of motorsports in the U.S. over the past couple of decades. And they said that the CEO, I think, of their company used to come to races and look at other cars, and they wanted to see, like, hey, look, we're a blue chip brand. We want to see other blue chip brands out here as well, because otherwise, like, what are we doing here? Why aren't some of our competitors here? So it's important for the sport to continue to have strong consumer brands. And yeah, Gamebridge technically is a consumer brand to an extent, but it's not very well known. So again, I'm not saying that's not going to be a good deal for the sport, but the sport certainly needs to continue to fill out its sponsor roster and bring some more, big promotional consumer companies into the sport.
Speaking to that point, and speaking to Chris's point as well about the shift from B to C, and this is going back a couple of years, but I think it's relevant. How major in terms of IndyCar switch from B2B to B2C, or from the opposite, from B2C to B2B, how crucial was the loss of Target? Because I remember hearing at the time that many companies that were involved with IndyCar started to get quite worried, or at least the teams did, when Target left. Was that kind of a tipping point, or was that just kind of the just a kind of a culmination of the shift in sponsorship dollars?
I'm not so sure that we've, that Target leaving in and of itself led to other brands leaving. I still think, first and foremost, obviously they've probably been the biggest defection in IndyCar since then. I don't think they've probably been the biggest brand to leave IndyCar since, whoever was the biggest before them has, there's not been another bigger brand since then. But I think obviously every decision comes down to the company themselves. You look at like Lowe's, for example, in NASCAR. They had new executive leadership who they weren't as into NASCAR, not necessarily in terms of just fandom, but, both probably fandom personally, and then also for whatever reason, they felt like it was time to try something new. Obviously, they now have a deal with the NFL. So, I'm not so sure that Target leaving in and of itself has like what led anyone else to exit, but certainly, again, going back to what I was saying a minute ago, there's no doubt that brands pay attention to the news. They pay attention to what other companies in the sport are doing. And that's why NASCAR, for example, is working so desperately to try and reverse this narrative of negativity and declines that they're facing, and that, somewhat besiege some of their fan base's mindsets and some of the media's mindset, somewhat understandably to an extent, of course. So, again, I think obviously, anytime you see a company like Target saying, hey, look, we don't even want to stick around for 5 races, like we are just taking our money, we are taking our ball and going home. Yeah, other brands pay attention to that. And it makes, the teams or properties or tracks that they're aligned with have to work overtime to say, hey, look, remember, we're still delivering you this value here, here, and here in these buckets, blah, blah, blah. Maybe, okay, we'll cut your price. You don't have to pay us as much. So it definitely has an impact. But in and of itself, I'm not sure that Target leaving has said, led to one other company leaving just because of that.
Okay, I know this is the IndyCar preview, and Chris is probably going to get mad at me for asking this question, but you brought it up. NASCAR and their narrative control. You just mentioned it. You just brought it up. Do you think this may be a bit of a loaded term, so I apologize if it is. Do you believe that they are gaslighting their fans, and do you believe that the way they've tried to control their narrative is hurting them more long-term than it would be if they just came out and said, look, fans, you're right about X, Y, and Z, but you're going a little too far about A, B, and C? Do you think they're handling the situation wrong? Because I certainly believe they are.
Well, I think potentially I think that's been the case to an extent, depending on, the particular scenario. But I think we've somewhat started to see that shift recently with some of the new leadership. You had the whole kind of big example of Steve Phelps, the president, coming out to the Daytona Beach News-Journal and saying, we lost our way, which I think a lot of people took as like, wow, like NASCAR actually was admitting something that they did wrong in a major way that they didn't in the past. So I think you started to see that change a little bit. I think like you saw after the race at Las Vegas, Steve O'Donnell was pretty contrite. He wasn't out there really trying to spin. He was like, look, the second and third stages were better, which I would agree they were, but overall it wasn't the most amazing race that like we were hoping for. We need to do more work. So I think hopefully NASCAR is probably trying to get a little bit more, frank and candid. Because I think to your point, trying to lead folks astray, people are going to be able to see through that either quickly or eventually. So I think there's definitely been part of that, David, for sure in NASCAR over the years. But, you got new leadership now with Jim France and Steve Phelps, and it seems like they're taking a more candid and frank approach. So, hopefully for the fans' sake and for the sport's sake, that can continue.
All right. I think I want to wrap up this episode with just a couple of questions. We already hit on a lot of these throughout the entire episode, so I'm just going to ask a couple that we didn't get to hit on. Sorry to cut our discussion about deals short. But the first question here is, and Adam, I'm pretty much just shooting all these towards you because I have no idea. I'm assuming Kevin and David don't have an idea as to the answer to these either. But first question here is how does the sanctioning fee IndyCar asks for from potential international events compare to those of the domestic events that they have?
Oh boy, I wish I could dig up those figures right now. I think if memory serves, certainly international is more expensive. IndyCar, I believe, if memory serves, looks for like close to double the amount, maybe even more. I think the sanction fees are usually somewhere in that kind of mid to high 6-figure, or certainly very low 7-figure range, 1.1, 1.2 at most. Just depends on the race, but certainly it's somewhere in that range for domestic races. And I think if memory serves for international races, they look for closer to like 2 to 3 million. So, they're coming up on that decision right now with Gold Coast, for example. Mark Miles told me a couple of days ago that decision is coming shortly. So, yeah, they look for a little bit more money internationally.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Gold Coast because it's obviously pretty much the biggest name we're hearing with international news right now.
Good thing they screwed up the Australian TV deal.
Still, I mean, for the international venues, it's still, $2 million still looks better than the F1 fees. I mean, by a lot.
Oh, yeah, no question. You have the advantage on the Gold Coast, too, of having history and having something to go off of and say, hey, look, your dad went to this race, your granddad went to this race. That's an advantage that IndyCar really doesn't have in a whole lot of places.
Well, especially if you could group that racing with the Supercars Gold Coast 600, but I don't know how likely that would be considering. Well, I guess they'd have to be run pretty close in proximity because they already have those streets shut down, but I know Supercars nowadays runs a much shortened layout than IndyCar used to.
Well, they actually tore up some of the old circuit. I don't even think it can be used anymore. I think they built hotels on some of it.
Okay. Moving on to the next question here. There's only one more after this, but brings up the potential rumors that they've been considering a NASCAR and IndyCar hybrid weekend at a track like Chicagoland. He also wondered that if an IndyCar race was to return to Richmond, if we could see a similar situation with that. Now, I have to assume that this is all speculation because obviously nothing is set in stone. We don't know if IndyCar is going back to Chicagoland or Richmond, but I think it's certainly unique to look at this potential for sort of a NASCAR IndyCar hybrid weekend because the two fan bases, from what I've seen in the past, sometimes they get together. I'd say more than not, they don't really get together. So I think it'd be kind of interesting to see what they think of each other's sort of side of the pond. Obviously, a completely different style of racing. One has high downforce, one is, well, I'm going to say one has low downforce, but with that massive spoiler they put on there now, I don't know how much I could say that. But I'd be curious to see what could come out of a situation like that, where you do have IndyCar and NASCAR cross weekends.
Yeah, I can touch on that. I can say for a fact, because I was able to confirm it with the people involved, that certainly Chicagoland was discussed last year. Now, it was very initial, preliminary. I think, if memory serves, IndyCar suggested it initially, but it wasn't something that really advanced to anything that was really close to happening. But at the same time, I think there's a receptiveness on both ends in terms of NASCAR and IndyCar. I know for a fact IndyCar is still open to it. And I think, under the proper circumstances, NASCAR would be potentially willing to give it a try. Might be more of a ISC track than an SMI track where we see it, at least at first. But yeah, I don't think, I haven't really checked much back into it ever since that, we reported about Chicagoland a couple months ago. We'll kind of, as obviously some of these schedule developments start to play out in the following year and getting ready for the following year's release, we'll hopefully get some more details there. But I definitely think it seems like, it's way too early to say it's definitely going to happen, but it seems like there's an openness there that might not have been there before. It seems like maybe IndyCar was open to it in the past, but certainly it seemed like NASCAR was not open to it. And it seems like that's changing. NASCAR obviously is having to try and stem some of these declines, and they're having to try different things. And obviously I think it makes a lot of sense to try and take a rising tide lifts all boats approach. And, as far as motorsports, and one of the ways you could do that is these double headers. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, they would sell a lot of tickets, and I think that's the
yeah.
one thing that everybody's looking at is that they probably sell that thing out. Now they'd have to price it right. If they priced it like Super Sebring, where it's $100 for two races, then all in, But
Yeah.
I would worry NASCAR or IndyCar would get too egocentric about it and be like, oh, we can't lower our ticket prices. The other races, charging X, Y, and Z for it, and that's what I would worry about in that situation. Too high at ticket prices, they price everybody out of it, and then they ruin what would be a really unique and interesting event.
Yeah.
My understanding was that IndyCar was open to running on the days before. So, there was an understanding that, NASCAR would be on the Sunday and IndyCar would either be on like Friday or Saturday. But, to your point, David, about the ticket prices, that could be a good point. So we'll just have to see what happens. But, I think if you try and take an approach of why not try as we're all trying to grow, you might see this being a potential thing to give it a whirl.
All right, last question here before we wrap it up. We've already doubled our expected runtime for the probably 15th time that this podcast has been a thing. But the last question is there any indication what sort of TV figures NBC is aiming for in their first year of exclusive coverage?
I certainly have not been able to get those figures yet. I mean, I even asked Mark Miles a couple of days ago if he could give me a range on the NBC Sports Gold. Are they looking for 50,000? Are they looking for 100,000 this year? Would they be happy, with do they need double that, et cetera? So I don't have those figures. I mean, in general, it seems like obviously they want to grow. The series actually did downtick last year. It did go down in ratings. It wasn't by an overly insane amount, but certainly I think the series will want to rebound this year. And so I think, gosh, I would have to go check the numbers, but it was somewhere in that 1.1 million range. I think the series averaged last year across all of their races. And so, yeah, I mean, you look at the amount of promotion that NBC is already trying to give to the Indy 500. Hopefully they'll, continue that in all sorts of ways, even beyond the Indy 500. There's no question they want to see these ratings grow. They're not going to release their internal projections to us. They wouldn't do that for any series. I mean, they don't see that as something that's beneficial to make that public. They want to keep that private. So I don't really know what their expectations are, but I would think, as long as they're at least flat from last year, they'll be satisfied. And, if they're up anywhere from 1% to 9%, they'll be very happy. And if they're up more than that, they're going to be just absolutely thrilled. So, yeah, I think, we saw NASCAR President Steve Phelps say flat's the new up. That's a little bit simplistic. I mean, you still can get upticks if you have proper star power and things like that. But overall, I think NBC certainly is hoping at minimum to be flat from last year. And, if they're up 3 to 4%, they'll probably be satisfied. And anything more than that, they'll be extremely happy.
I think it's going to come down to two things. One of them is promotion, which we've already seen that they've been advertising the season and the Indy 500 during NFL games on Sunday Night Football. So I think that's obviously a really positive direction. I don't think I've seen NBC doing that previous seasons. I certainly didn't see ABC doing that previous seasons in the realm of like football games. So I think that they already have that down. The advertising side, obviously, the more advertising, the merrier. But it's also going to come down to those handful. I think it's 6 or so races that they have on NBC this year. Obviously, last year ABC had ABC had the official network rights, so NBC couldn't broadcast any of the races. They had to be on the cable channel NBCSN. So I'd be curious if any of those races at the end help bring an uptick in ratings. Generally, they do, but ratings don't necessarily mean everything.
Yeah, they got. I think they have 8 races on broadcast this year. So they got a nice little uptick there, which obviously, you always want to see. The more chances you can get in front of more people, obviously, the better. So, yeah, again, I think at a bare minimum, they'll be looking to be flat. And last year's numbers, I think they were down. It wasn't an insane amount, but they were off enough where certainly the series is going to want to rebound this year.
All right. I think that's enough to wrap it up for this IndyCar preview. Hour and 20 minutes worth of TV deals and sponsorships. Didn't honestly expect it to go that far, but if you are an IndyCar fan and you have made it this far into the episode, consider subscribing to the podcast either on YouTube or Google Play or Apple Podcasts or CastBox, since that's a new source. I'll have them all linked on Twitter. If you want to check us out, because we will have some more exclusive IndyCar, not exclusive really, but some more IndyCar content, especially in the month of May. I'd love to do a month of May preview, hopefully with another IndyCar driver. We had Zach Veach on in the past. We'll see what we can gather with that. So again, consider subscribing if you don't want to miss any of that content for the month of May. Other than that, I appreciate Adam for taking out all this time to help us discuss the upcoming season. Thank you very much for that. Kyle and not Kyle. It's funny I mentioned Kyle.
Definitely not Kyle.
Definitely not Kyle. But David and Kevin for taking time out of their schedule as well. We got some great input here for the season. Hope that everybody enjoys this season. We'll have some more discussion going on after the season starts, and I hope to see you all there.